Hello, healthy people, and welcome back to the Organelle podcast. Today's episode is an exploration and introduction to the effects of stress on health. We'll navigate through the surprising relationship between those two things, how to tell if you're getting too much in your life or too little, and of course, what you can do about it. As always, I'm Xavior Greenhalgh, and joining me will be none other than Organelle, the digital health platform's leading practitioner, Lionel Godwin. So without further ado, let's all take the next steps on our health journeys. Hello once more, Lionel. How are we doing?
Xavier, I am well, thank you for asking. Yes, I had a good day.
It's good that you had a good day because today we're talking about something that could be a little bit stressful. And that is, of course, stress itself. This is going to be episode 4 of our Organelle Basics series. We're going over all the fundamental pillars of health. And today we're having a special highlight on something that's become a lot more talked about in recent years, and that is stress. So, Lionel, as we do here, I'd like you to take it away with your fundamental definition for what is stress.
And again, it's different for most people, but first and foremost, let's understand and recognize that stress is a normal part of life. It's just one of those normal parts of life and it's our natural response to challenging or threatening situations or undue pressures. So, that's what stress is. Stress sometimes can be very good for us because it allows us to stay alert and hyper focused. But if it overwhelms us, obviously it can have some really detrimental effects on not only our overall health and well-being, but our state of mind as well. So sometimes we fear stress more than we should, but stress in the right environment can be beneficial, but it's something that we should always be looking to manage.
Yeah, I think a big turning point for me when it came to looking into stress, preparing for this episode, and just thinking about it, is that stress isn't really just a bad thing you want to eliminate. It's more of a golden mean where you want your stress to be in a certain range. You don't want too little, you don't want too much. Because at the end of the day, I like to think about it in terms of muscles, because that's what I'm easily familiar with my bro science background. Is that if you have too little stress on a muscle, it starts to atrophy, it starts to disappear. If you've got too much, it obviously breaks and tears down and can't recover. You put just the right amount of stress on a muscle, it's going to soak that up, then respond and grow accordingly. So, one thing I want to preface this whole conversation with is to draw a distinct line between stress and anxiety and just kind of talk about how those two combine. So, Lionel,
Mhm.
could you define anxiety for us and then tell us how
So
that differs?
anxiety, as opposed to stress, anxiety is more a feeling of worry or fear, and it's generally accompanied with some sort of physical symptom or expression, like a rapid heartbeat, for instance, is generally a form of anxiety. You might break out in a cold sweat or be trembling, with anxiety. Whereas with stress, you're generally not going to get that. It's more, you're getting this prolonged feeling of unease, and it goes for a much longer period. Stress as opposed to anxiety. With stress, you're not generally getting that, the rapid heartbeat per se, and the sweating and that trembling that was normally associated with anxiety.
Yeah, stress can definitely cause anxiety, and anxiety can definitely cause stress. But for the purposes of this discussion, we could be focusing on stress. And you touched on something really interesting there, which is kind of the physiological effects that underpin these mental things. So, what's our body going to be doing when we're under, for this example, just purely a mental type of stress? What's
So,
happening when we're
our body's generally going to release, a lot more adrenaline and
Mm,
cortisol, when we're in this stress state, which, it can elevate our heart rate. It can certainly increase our blood sugar levels over time, and it can contribute to heart disease and obesity, depression, anxiety, and a whole range of other chronic health conditions if we don't learn to manage stress within the body.
yeah, to me, and you'll probably have to correct me because once again, I'm me. But stress is kind of it's a focusing thing, right? So we've talked previously in the last episode about how the body has a certain amount of energy and it distributes that energy to certain systems in your body according to the needs that your environment and your circumstance are presenting it. And when we're in a situation where we feel really stressed, whether that's a deadline or people are watching us and we care about their opinions or something like that, it's almost causing our body to focus so much on those things that we perceive them as threats. And that puts us in this fight or flight response, which in and of itself is pretty bad. But the worst thing is that whilst we're in that fight or flight response, all of our energy is being funneled to that. And that means that all the other systems, which were previously receiving energy that keep us happy and healthy and functioning, those aren't getting any. So they're almost shutting down whilst we focus entirely on whatever the cause of this stress is. Have I
They're
made a
certainly
fool
not
of
shutting
myself there?
down. They're not
No?
shutting down, but they're certainly not working at their optimum to help the body deal with the excess adrenaline and cortisol that's happening. I mean, there is such a thing as eustress, for instance, which is,
Mm,
it's a positive form of stress because it allows you to be very focused and very clinical and very organized in your thinking.
mm,
But then that, we want that to pass. When we've got, excessive stress that is brought on by a range of circumstances and or conditions, that's when it starts to really impact our other organs in that they're not getting the support that they need. They're not being, and they're not able to function as synergistically as we would like them to try and support, the heart and the brain and the adrenals that are being most impacted by, constant stress and anxiety.
yeah, and those effects kind of compound if you're just really stressed for a prolonged period of time.
Oh,
Wherein
look,
those
hundred
systems are
percent.
designed to survive. Yeah.
I alluded to it earlier. If we're under constant stress, our all sorts of health problems are going to occur. As I said, depression, anxiety, sleep disorders, heart issues, immune system issues. All of these things become compromised as a consequence of not being able to manage stress. You know, in one of our earlier podcasts, Xavier, we talked about um, exercise and the significance of exercise, and this is where one of the great de-stresses in our life can be. Exercise is one of those for me in particular, and I advise most people who are stressed to try and fit in some form of physical activity to try and allow them to deal with the ravages of stress. For me, exercise has this calming, almost meditative effect on the body to help us deal with stress and anxiety.
A bunch of great
And
stuff there. I want to backtrack a little bit and clarify something for the user because we touched on eustress, and I want to define that out as, to me, how I have learned it is that all stress could be classified as either eustress or distress. And the
yes,
main distinction between those two things is that eustress is stress that we're confident and we know that we can handle, and distress is stuff that we don't feel in control of. Would you agree with that distinction?
yeah, absolutely. And eustress is something that we don't need to manage per se because it's generally a short term thing that helps us really be focused and task orientated for a particular role. Whereas distress is something that's overwhelming. It's starting to, you know, stop you being as impactful and as productive and as generous and or cognizant as you need to be. You're not as engaged as you should be because you're fighting this internal battle with yourself, whether it be real or imagined, and it makes us really, really, really ineffective. It's very disruptive. It's very disruptive to our moods. It's very destructive to our relationships, our productivity.
Okay, and then I think the really tricky thing to get through to people is that the difference between eustress and distress isn't an absolute thing. It's very relative to the individual and their situation. What
Yeah,
might be a eustress, a source of stress that's classified as eustress for one person, could very easily be a distressful thing for
distress.
another person.
Mm,
The
mm.
easiest, we bring it back to the muscle again because I think that's the easy way to biologically express it. If you're a huge guy like yourself and you're curling a 30-kilo dumbbell, well, that's going to be a source of eustress because you're going to be able to grow from that. But if you take um, well, the stereotypical 65-year-old and you put that guy in the gym and he tries to pick up a 30-kilo dumbbell, that's very much going to be a distressful situation for his muscle
Mm.
fibers.
Yeah.
So it's just through improving not only your abilities in yourself, but your perception of those abilities that we can gain or rather raise the bar on what is classified as eustress and what's distress for us. Do you have any
And
tips for the listeners
well, it's important
around
to
raising that?
understand that it's important to understand that stress can come in the form of both physical and emotional or mental. So, yes, it's really, really important. From a let's talk about muscle and weight training because it's a passion of mine. As you know, I love weight training. I've been doing it for most of my life. But um, you know, I have eustress is what gets me into the gym. I'm trying to create some distress in the gym, but in a very controlled, and bless you, a very controlled environment. So, I use both the eustress and the de-stress and the distress, sorry, in a positive sense because I'm controlling that environment and that situation. Um, for other people, though, it's not that simple, and so we need to develop mechanisms around managing stress, whether it be eustress or distress. And for me, there are so many different techniques that we can use around that.
Yeah, let's talk systems. What just generally here, generally, Lionel, it's not prescription for everyone. This is just your opinion. What
Yep.
is the highest leverage single thing a listener should start doing to manage distress levels?
By understanding what it is and what the cause of it is, and what their capacity is to manage it. And if they believe they don't have the capacity to manage it, then they need to start looking at some counseling or some professional help. If they believe they've got the capacity to manage it, part of the management strategies that they might use would one be exercise, two would be meditation or deep breathing or stretching or music or something that allows them to take themselves away from that stressed state. And it's different for everybody. I've, you know this from previous discussions you and I have. For me, I'm not someone who can sit down and do deep breathing or meditation. But if I go for a walk, for me, that's my form of meditation because when I'm out walking, my mind is clear. I'm not a person who walks with earpods or has my phone with me. I use my walking, my being out in the environment, feeling nature, the natural rhythms and vibrations of nature are for me a very cathartic experience. They're like my form of meditation because they just clear my mind just by listening to and feeling the vibrations and the natural rhythms of nature. So for me, walking is my way of de-stressing. But for others, it could be, as I said, deep breathing. It could be relaxation techniques. It could be music, or in some cases, professional help or counselling.
Yeah. Do you think there's a deeper? I'm trying to extrapolate here, just making a wild guess. Is there a deeper physiological slash biological process behind this kind of de-stressing environment? Like a lot of people will say that being out in nature is going to help them relax and just clear up their mind and think. What's actually happening on like a hormonal level when we are de-stressing like that?
Well, for me, as I try and explain it to people, we as human beings are made up of chemical reactions, neurotransmissions, rhythms, vibrations, and frequency. So I find nature allows me to connect with all of those facets, and they just have a naturally calming effect on my body because I recognize that I am a natural part of these rhythms, vibrations, and transmissions. That I try and connect with nature in a way that is not tree hugging or spiritual in essence, but it's just an acceptance and an acknowledgement that I'm in an environment of which I am a part of. So I get I, I'll quantify that by saying when I go walking, I don't walk in peak hour traffic or hostile environments. I'm walking around rivers or water or trees and calm and natural or as natural as they can be environments, so that I can actually feel the energy and the rhythms and the vibrations and the influences within nature. So for me, it's a deep rooted psychological connection that I have just to nature because I'm a part of nature. Everything within my body is exactly what's happening outside my window every day or outside my front door. And I find great solace and comfort from those natural rhythms and vibrations and frequencies.
I see. Is there is there a nutritional angle to health? Not health, sorry, stress.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So why are there foods that we can eat that will help manage stress?
Because the foods that we eat go into our bloodstream and get deposited around our organs and our system, and allows natural restoration and regeneration to occur. That hopefully then allows for the stress to be emitted. Food helps balance out hormones and the body's chemistry. Food in and of itself is generally a very calming thing for most people. Well, for me, it is. A lot of people don't find food calming, but food can be a very calming and relaxing thing to engage in. And you know, I try. We're digressing a bit, but for people that are really stressed and anxious, one of the things I talk to them about when they're eating is to actually create a really positive environment for eating, and that is just actually sit down and enjoy. Give yourself 10 or 15 minutes to enjoy whatever it is in front of you. So, not only is there physiological benefits from the foods that we eat and the nutrients in those foods, there's also the whole ritual around eating that you can make it an enjoyable and calming experience. You've eaten out with me many times, Xavier, and you know that I like to have an abundance of different types of foods. And I like that experience to be a really warm and engaging and calming experience. And food and nutrition, I think, can really have a very positive impact on people from a stress level. Conversely, though, if you're really stressed and anxious and you then go and just eat some junk food, it's full of trans fats and empty calories, that can have the opposite effect. They can just actually hype the body up in the stress levels even more because you're actually adding to the imbalances within your body's chemistry and your hormones and the um, um, complex uh, biology that's going on within the body is it can be made worse by the fact that we haven't got good nutrients coming into the body. So for me, for anybody who is really stressed and anxious, I'm trying to get them to really have good nutrient dense foods because that will generally have a very positive effect on stress.
Yeah, I never really thought of it like that, but it is really eating bad food is a double whammy right to the face because you put the bad meal before you, and suddenly you start to mentally stress over the fact that you're eating bad food and you know it's bad for your health and you don't know that this is a good thing, but you feel like you can't control what you're eating. And then on top of that, all that psychological stress, you actually eat the bad food, and then that bad food's causing inflammation, and it's undernourishing you because they're empty calories, and it's just acting against you from the inside out. So you're getting both the physical and the mental elements that are both working against you when you eat poorly, which is a pretty terrifying way to put it because that kind of causes a negative infinite loop, doesn't it?
It does, and I couldn't have put that better than the way that you've just explained that. And this is why nutrition and understanding your biomarkers is so important to me. The reason that I founded Organelle was so that people could understand, and measure when they are in perhaps a stressed and anxious state where they've eaten well and they've had their biomarkers done and they see their cortisol levels are down. And then if they've then conversely eaten really, really poorly and they've had another blood test, they can see how elevated things are within their biomarkers. So, you know, food is such an important part of our overall health and well-being, particularly when it comes to managing stress.
Beautiful. I think we've put out a beautiful primer for stress there as it relates to health and as it relates to the organelle process. Thank you once more for an awesome episode, Lionel, and looking forward to next week.
As I am, Xavier, have a really calm and restful week. Eat well and get out of your own head.
Yeah, I'll try not to stress, eh? Goodbye.